Hello guys, welcome back. My name's David and today I'm going to be predicting who will win the 2020 NHL Stanley Cup. Now last year we saw the St. Louis Blues get their first Stanley Cup in franchise history, and this next year will be as entertaining as the last one. With so many fantastic teams looking to contend for the Stanley Cup, this will definitely be a battle till the very end. So which teams do I see making the playoffs, going far in the playoffs, and which team do I see winning the 2020 Stanley Cup? Watch till the end to find out. Now, trying to predict who would make the playoffs in the first place was pretty hard, but predicting who would make the playoffs and win the Stanley Cup was on a different level as well. There's so many fantastic teams and contenders for the Stanley Cup that I could totally see win the Cup this year. Again, we saw St. Louis, who was last place in December, rising up to win the Stanley Cup. So if the NHL has proved anything, it's proved that anything is possible. And a lot of these teams could end up winning the Cup by the end of the year. Now, in order to discuss who I think will win the Stanley Cup, we gotta first go for the playoff teams and the teams who I think will make the playoffs this season. Now, starting in the Atlantic Division, I have the Tampa Bay Lightning winning the President's Trophy with 112 points, the Toronto Maple Leafs getting second in the Atlantic, getting 102 points, and the Florida Panthers with 99 points, the top three spots in the Atlantic. Then I see two wild cards coming from the Atlantic too, the Boston Bruins with 97 points, and the Montreal Canadiens with 96 points. Moving on to the Metro Division, I see three teams getting the playoffs and a couple of teams missing those wild card spots. At number one, I see the Carolina Hurricanes taking it with 108 points, the Washington Capitals getting in second with 102 points, and last but not least, the Philadelphia Flyers reaching the 100-point threshold and making the playoffs. Now going to the Western Conference and the Central Division, I have five different teams making the playoffs here. First, starting with the Colorado Avalanche, I see them bagging 107 points in the regular season, having a great season overall. To the second place team, I have the St. Louis Blues, the Stanley Cup champions, with 104 points. The Dallas Stars come in third, rounding at the top three in the Central with 103 points, right behind St. Louis. And going into the wild cards, I see Nashville getting 100 points, and the Winnipeg Jets just barely getting it with 93 points. Now moving on to the Pacific Division, last but not least, I see three different teams making it. Of course, we had two wild cards from the Central Division, so three teams make it in the Pacific. Starting with the San Jose Sharks at number one, I see them getting 104 points and winning the division this year. Second, to the Vegas Golden Knights, who will get 102 points, just shy of San Jose. And for my third team, the Pacific, I have the Arizona Coyotes getting it just barely with 97 points. Now that you know the playoff teams that I have selected, we can now get into who I think will win the 2020 Stanley Cup. Now, starting with the first series, the President's Trophy winner versus the second wildcard team in the East, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning versus the Montreal Canadiens. And I think this would be a great matchup in this weird, wacky world. I think it would be a much more contested matchup than some people might expect. But in the end, I see the Lightning winning in 6 games. It will be a close series. Montreal will give a good fight, but Tampa will get it in the end. Now going to our second matchup in the Eastern Conference, going from the second and third team in the Atlantic, we have the Toronto Maple Leafs versus the Florida Panthers. And man, this matchup would honestly be one of the most fun series. I don't exactly see it being a very close one, going to 7 games or anything, but it will be an electrifying, high offense series, which would just be so fun to watch between these two teams. In the end, I think the Maple Leafs will win in 5 games. I think, honestly, when it comes to Florida's defense, that'll be the main gripe there. But Florida and Toronto, while I think Toronto is a better team, they aren't too much different, having great offenses, solid goaltending, and defense that we might not want to talk about. But in the end, I think Toronto is just a better team overall and will beat Florida in 5. Now going to our third matchup in the Eastern Conference, going to the team who I think will finish first in the Metro and the first wildcard team, the Carolina Hurricanes and the Boston Bruins, a rematch of the Eastern Conference Final. And this would honestly be a ton of fun to watch. As a Carolina Hurricanes fan, I would just be dreaming and hoping that they end up being the Boston Bruins. But in this series, while I think the Hurricanes will have a great regular season, I think they'll come up short in the postseason and will lose in 7 games versus the Boston Bruins. The Bruins just know how to win Game 7s in the first round, and I think they will do it versus Carolina. Now going to one of the more fascinating series that I have lined up in my predictions, that being between the Capitals and the Flyers. A solid rivalry matchup between two solid teams. I think those will be a close series when it comes to the games, but not in the final score. I think Washington will end up winning this one in 5 games, closing out the series. I think Washington just has a better roster overall in the regular season, and it's more built for the playoffs. While Philadelphia will have a roster built for making the playoffs, they won't have the longevity that Washington does, and obviously the experience they've had in the past few years. Now, getting out of the Eastern Conference and now into the Western Conference, and going to the team who is number 1 in the West, and to the team that finished in the second wild card, we have the Colorado Avalanche versus the Winnipeg Jets. And this one will be so fascinating. With the Winnipeg Jets, they have a ton of drama right now. Who knows what they might end up looking like in a year's time, but I still think they're a playoff team, albeit just barely. But the Colorado Avalanche are a solid team too. I think this might be closer than the points do suggest, but I think Colorado will end up sweeping the Winnipeg Jets. Again, this all does depend on how Winnipeg looks in a year. They could be completely different, but I think Colorado will have their way versus Winnipeg, and will just steamroll them into oblivion. Now, going to the other matchup in the Central Division, the second versus the third Central team. And as a Dallas Stars fan, when I was making these predictions, I was just really hoping that it would not be St. Louis versus Dallas. But I found a way to predict St. Louis versus Dallas again. And you guessed it, I think the St. Louis Blues will win that series once again. Versus the Dallas Stars, the St. Louis Blues just have their way. I think the Blues will win in 6 games. I think it'll be a close series, an awesome series, but the Dallas Stars just can't beat St. Louis in the playoffs. We've seen that time and time again. Going to one of the more interesting series potentially in my playoffs. This one next between the first Pacific team and the first wildcard team, between the Sharks and the Predators. This one I think would be a super close series. Both teams have great offense, great defense. While San Jose doesn't have great goaltending, I think they have a much better offense, a maybe even better defense if everything goes right for them. And I think when it comes to San Jose, they will just barely get the edge in this one. In 7 games, I think the San Jose Sharks will advance to the second round, but it will be a big challenge versus Nashville. I think they'll have a better season and likely a better playoffs too. Now, going to the last first-round matchup in the Western Conference, we have the Golden Knights versus the Arizona Coyotes. The Arizona Coyotes, thankfully, just get into the playoffs, and they get it done. But for this series, I think it'll be a lot closer than people do expect. Between Vegas and Arizona, I think Vegas will force a Game 7. I think they'll get to 7 games. It'll be a close one. But I think the Vegas Golden Knights will end up making the second round just barely above the Arizona Coyotes. I mean, the Golden Knights are my 3rd favorite team, but I would still love to see the Arizona Coyotes not just make the playoffs, but do some damage in the playoffs. That will be super refreshing. But as a Vegas Golden Knights fan, they have one of the better chances of making the playoffs and doing well in the playoffs, but they will make the second round, in my opinion. Now, getting into the second round matchups, starting in the Eastern Conference, we have a series that I've been longing and waiting to finally see happen, and I'm hoping it finally does happen this season. The matchup between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Toronto Maple Leafs. 2 high-octane teams with great offenses, some solid goaltending. Tampa obviously does have the edge defensively, but both teams are fantastic. In this series, I think Tampa would end up taking it in 7. It'll be a super close series with Toronto making the second round. They'll obviously want to do more than that and make the Eastern Conference final if possible, but I think Toronto will just have to wait a couple more years for that, if not 1 year. I think this year is Tampa's time to get past not just the first round versus Columbus, but that second round too, and hopefully do some damage in the Stanley Cup final. Now, going to the second matchup is for the second round in the Eastern Conference, that being between the Capitals and the Boston Bruins. Now, if you've been paying attention whatsoever to Capitals hockey in the past few years, you would know that the Capitals have Boston's number to a T. It's almost insane how good the Capitals have been versus the Boston Bruins. It's almost abusive how good Washington has been. And I think Washington will have their way versus Boston in the second round. I think Washington will win in 5 games and will do very well for themselves. Honestly, Boston has a great team, and I think, again, they will make the playoffs, but I think Washington has more longevity and will once again make the Eastern Conference final. Now, getting into the second round in the Western Conference, now going to the Avalanche versus the St. Louis Blues. And this series would just be so awesome to see a reality. Yes, I would like the Dallas Stars to actually, make the second round and get out of the second round as a Stars fan, but honestly, this series would be more than enough. When it comes to the Avalanche, a team that's rising up as a playoff contender, the St. Louis Blues who want to get that repeat Stanley Cup. It would just be a great series till the end. And this one, again, I think could go either way. It's one where I can see the Avalanche winning or the Blues winning, but in the end, while it'll be close, I see the Avalanche winning in the end, just barely in 6 games. I think St. Louis is a better overall team, but I don't think Binnington will be as good as he was last season. I think that might be a downfall for the Blues, and that Avalanche offense, which is improved, I think will take over. Now getting into that second round matchup in the Western Conference between the San Jose Sharks and, you guessed it, the Vegas Golden Knights. A rematch of that electrifying first round series last year. This one will be one to grab the popcorn for. It'll be a close series till the end, just like last one. Hopefully won't get screwed up by refs this time. But in the end, I think the Sharks will as well get the advantage in the end. In 5 games, I see the San Jose Sharks in those 5 games, close games versus the Vegas Golden Knights, but we'll be able to get the win time after time again. The Vegas Golden Knights, yes, have a good roster, but I'm not sure if it's good enough to contend with the San Jose Sharks, which I think roster-wise are one of the best in the NHL. Now we have our Eastern Conference and Western Conference final matchup set between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Washington Capitals in the East, and the San Jose Sharks versus the Colorado Avalanche in the West. And these two series would be amazing. The Lightning versus the Capitals rematch of the 2018 Eastern Conference final, and the Avalanche versus the Sharks rematch of last year's second round. It would honestly be amazing to see these two ones happen, and honestly both of them will be amazing to watch. We're going to start out in the Eastern Conference and decide who will make the Stanley Cup final out of the two, Washington or Tampa Bay. And honestly, going between these two teams is honestly a coin flip. Both teams have amazing experience, both teams are great on paper, and both teams could go back to the Stanley Cup final easily. But in this series, I see the Tampa Bay Lightning getting revenge versus the Washington Capitals and returning to the Stanley Cup final for the first time since 2015. I see the Tampa Bay Lightning having a close series, but this time winning in 7 games rather than losing in 7 games. Now that we have the Lightning coming out of the Eastern Conference, we now point our focus to the Western Conference between Colorado and San Jose. And between these two teams, once again, just like the other one, it is a coin flip for me. I was going back and forth between Colorado, San Jose, just deciding my options. But to me, I see the San Jose Sharks winning this series in 6, with a Stanley Cup final matchup between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the San Jose Sharks. Now, at first, I was pretty reluctant to do this, because if you saw my predictions from last year, you would know that I predicted San Jose and the Tampa Bay Lightning to meet in the Stanley Cup final. And I was kind of tempted to just put Colorado just to change things up, but I am genuinely thinking that this will actually happen. Again, yes, I'm just going to double down on this prediction, but things have changed for both teams. I think the stakes when it comes to both teams have been lowered because of the disappointment they've had, and especially the Tampa Bay Lightning. After losing versus the Columbus Blue Jackets in a sweep, I don't think the expectations are too high for them right now. Yes, there is some great expectations, but for Tampa Bay, I think it's lower compared to years past. I think that'll help them just like it helped Washington back in 2018. Now, going into this Stanley Cup final between Tampa and the San Jose Sharks, this one just being an absolute brawl to the end. But unlike last year, I'm going to predict the Tampa Bay Lightning to win the 2020 Stanley Cup. It'll be a close series for sure, but I see Tampa going over San Jose in 6 games. Now, I know what you might be thinking. It's crazy, and yeah, it is definitely crazy, but as a guy that's looked and admired and loved the Tampa Bay Lightning for a long time, I kind of think this is our year. Yes, there's a ton of years that might have been labeled as our year, but this year, 2020, is when I think they'll get it done for the first time since 2004. And this is for a bunch of different reasons. Again, as I mentioned, I think the biggest reason why is because I think the pressure will be a lot less so than it used to be. Yes, winning the President's Trophy is always going to be a booster for people's predictions, but I think even if they win the President's Trophy, people will still be saying that they'll end up choking. That happened with the Washington Capitals time and time again. Yes, there are people saying they will win the Stanley Cup, and me included back in those years, but there was always some doubt there. I think there will be some big doubt for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Until they get it done, until they win the Stanley Cup, there will always be that doubt there. But this year, I think it'll be different. There's some great guys coming out of the offense. Yes, you're subtracting guys like JT Miller, but I don't think that'll be a giant loss for Tampa Bay either. I think that defense is as strong as ever with guys like Hedman, McDonough, and Sergachev, who will likely have a bounce-back year. And I think Andrei Vasilevsky is primed for the best year of his career. I think last year was a year where he probably shouldn't have won the Vezina Trophy. I don't think he was the best goaltender whatsoever. But this next year, I think he'll actually get it done in the playoffs, which is different from what we've seen in the past few years. But of course, with this video, I need to hear your guys' thoughts down those comments down below. So let me know what you think about my picks for the Stanley Cup final. What do you think about my picks for the playoffs and my Stanley Cup winner? What do you agree and disagree with? And of course, the big, huge, humongous question on to you. Who do you think will win the 2020 Stanley Cup? But if you guys want some more Grav videos just like this one, you should totally click on this link right here to watch my video on my color predictions for the 2019 and 20 season. Trust me, it's a good one. You'll want to click it. But that'll be it for today, guys. If you guys enjoy, make sure to hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Again, comment down below your thoughts on my picks, what you agree and disagree with, and who you see winning the Stanley Cup. Share this video with your friends. Also, if you haven't, trying to grow the Grav gang as much as possible on the road to 10K, boys. Let's get that done. I'm Nathan, and I'll see you guys in the next video or stream. Goodbye.